We can tell from looking out the window in the social hall that there's a gaggle of people that went off for the beach house. Now, we should say in their defense that event has been scheduled for a very long time, and this event was scheduled like 2 weeks ago. So, and people we honor the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process and voting with your feet. So we honor that people will do what they feel they need to do at the moment. So we understand that attendance here may be less than what we might aspire it to be. Part of what we know from the people that we've heard from in advance is that there are people who had wanted to be here but are out of town and can't be here. So we are videotaping this presentation. And Chris, I think we're already underway, is that right? Yeah, so we're videotaping this presentation so that those who are not here or were not able to be here in person can view it later, and we'll have a showing of it. But those of you who are here, and we are very, very appreciative of your being here. We are going to have about, I think, about an hour and 15 minutes is what I think, till about 2:30, if that works for people. And I'm going to do a few introductory words and then invite our guests to speak for a few minutes. And then we will I have some questions that I've prepared, and then we'll have open questions and answers. And the microphones down here on the floor, which I will move into a more congenial location, can be microphones that you will be able to come up to and use to ask questions of our guests. So, let me introduce Mary Katherine Morn, immediately on my left, the Director of Stewardship and Development and Special Assistant to the President at the UUA, a member of the Leadership Council, and she has been a stalwart presence at the UUA and the UUA staff through a long period. How long have you been at the UUA? 3 years in this position at the UUA. Within the Unitarian Universalist movement for how many years? For 30 years as a parish minister and serving in various places. She can tell you more about that. But she's been part of the Leadership Council that is seen the congregation, the Unitarian Universalist Association, through the recent changes and events that have happened. On her left is the Reverend William Sinkford, Senior Minister at First Unitarian Church in Portland, Oregon, Interim Co-President of the UUA, and he'll tell you a little bit more about that. Some of you may remember Bill Sinkford as the President of the association, and I was privileged to serve on the UUA Board of Trustees when Bill was President, and it's wonderful to have him as a guest here at this congregation where he is no stranger. So let me just say a few words. Over the past 75 years, the UU congregation at Shelter Rock has developed a very special relationship with the Unitarian Universalist Association. Not only as its single largest annual donor, we give a grant somewhere between $900,000 and $1 million a year to the association, but also as a partner in promoting the growth of Unitarian Universalism and promoting social justice activism amongst our congregations. The UUA has been through, as Jennifer referenced in the sermon, some traumatic events in recent days, and I think it's important for us as a congregation that has this special relationship with the UUA to understand this as closely and clearly as we can. Let me just begin by laying out a few facts for those of you who may not be aware. So UUA President Peter Morales resigned on April 1st, about 3 months before the end of his term. His term was to end in June. Two other senior staff people, Harlan Limpert and Scott Taylor, resigned shortly thereafter. Controversy over UUA hiring practices precipitated these resignations. While the UUA has publicly committed to become an anti-racist association for at least 2 decades, almost all of the top staff positions at the UUA are held by white people. The hiring of a white male minister to a regional leadership position in March touched off the most recent firestorm of criticism of the UUA, its hiring practices, and its commitment to building a multicultural staff. The Board of Trustees, which Jim Key, who was originally to have been here, he is suffering from some back problems, and we regret that and send him healing energy. The Board of Trustees has chosen a 3-person team to serve as interim co-presidents of the UUA until June 24th, when a new UUA president will be elected. And there are 3 candidates for that, all of whom are women. So the next person who will inherit the leadership of the UUA by the virtue of that election will be a woman. Bill Sinkford is one of the 3 people on that that the board has designated. So with that as the background, let me invite Bill and Mary Katherine to begin by sharing something of their own perspectives, and then I'll have a few questions that they know I'm going to ask them in advance, and then we'll open up to questions from the floor. So if that's agreeable to you, I'll defer to whichever of the 2 of you either won the coin toss or lost the coin toss.
And we're not going to reveal which that was. Thank you very much, Ned, for that kind and honest introduction. I'm awfully glad personally to be back here at the congregation. I have many memories of visiting. I know some of the folks in the sanctuary right now, some fairly well, and I value those friendships. I actually want to begin with thanks, building on what Ned said. Not only is the Shelter Rock congregation the largest donor to the association and has been from time out of mind, but it is, I think, a reality that you should know, that Unitarian Universalism would be a different faith community without the support that you have offered to it. Our theological schools would look quite different if they existed at all, and the Unitarian Universalist Association and many of its congregations would not be as strong, healthy, and vital, and able to witness in a world which desperately needs our healing message in the way that they are without your support. So I begin with a deep sense of gratitude to the congregation here at Shelter Rock. And move on from there to this period in the life of the association. I should say that I have been preached at a lot in congregations. It's rare that I get preached about when I'm sitting in the pews. So I want to thank Jennifer for bringing forward some of my history in that wonderful sermon that she preached. I should also say that I thought I was finished being president of the UUA until about 2 weeks ago, when I got a call asking me if I might be willing to consider serving for this very brief interim period. It's only a total of about 11 and a half, 12 weeks, with some very specific goals in mind, and I was able to say yes and to arrange to be lent by the First Unitarian Church of Portland, Oregon, to the association once again. The tasks that I have been charged with and that the co-presidents have been charged with are extensive, but they all center around one reality, that these times, although they contain enormous sadness, the first resignation of the UUA president in our history as an association, the resignation of the first Latino president of the Unitarian Universalist Association, resignations of other senior leaders on the staff, and around a hire that has been characterized as racist, as exemplifying white supremacy culture. I would not be at all surprised, because I've heard it from so many people, that when you heard that, you said, "What? The Unitarian Universalist Association? A racist hire? How could that be given our values? How could that be given our history and our commitment? How could that be?" Well, there's a long conversation about how that could be, which was actually introduced by Jennifer in her sermon. But my charge as one of the 3 interim co-presidents is to help us find the opportunity in this time rather than simply a set of problems to be solved. And that's an assignment, a charge from the Board of Trustees that I was able to embrace. And I wanted to spend just a moment talking with you about what the opportunity that I see is in these times. First and most importantly, I think that having our commitments and the culture in which we live our religious life called into question around issues of race and culture is an opportunity for us, an opportunity not only for us to do some truth-telling, but also for us to take the next step on our journey toward the beloved community, which is the language that I use. The next step, it's a recognition that we have not done all that we need to do, that we need some additional reflection and additional commitment to move forward. The second opportunity that I think this presents for us is an opportunity to recenter on the values of Unitarian Universalism as lived out in our congregations like this one each and every week, to recenter on what we find of value and what the people who find us report when they come into this sanctuary or any sanctuary for the first time. The things that you have heard, perhaps some of you have said, things like, "I never thought I would find a religion like this. I never thought I would find a religion where I didn't have to check my intellect at the door. I never thought I would find a religion where my children could receive religious education based on values that I actually affirm. I never thought I could find a church, a congregation like this." So it's an opportunity for us to recenter, to get clear on what is of importance to us, what we need to carry forward, and also what we may need to change. And thirdly, and this is exemplified by the 3 co-presidents. Why did the Board of Trustees ask 3 of us to share a presidency for only these few weeks?
Especially if we're Unitarians and not Trinitarians.
Absolutely. We go to the Trinity so often. So I need to tell you that the decision to invite 3 was not an automatic impulse on the part of the Board of Trustees. And it in fact came with pressure from 3 person of color members on the 12-member UUA board, who said that we need a different style of leadership in this movement. We do not need another single-point leadership style president. We need to be exploring and living in a deeper collaborative leadership style. And we would like to model this in this interim period. Now, it's very challenging for us. It's very challenging for us. But it's an important sign. And so the sign and the opportunity here is for us to do some internal reflection on how we do things around here and see if there are not some different ways we should at least be experimenting with to make how we do things around here more consistent with our hopes for how we will do things around here come the kingdom, if I may use a traditional phrase. Anyway, I'm seeing the opportunity in this in this time for us, and I look forward to this opportunity to be in conversation.
Thank you, Bill.
I appreciate Ned inviting me to be part of this conversation as well. And what I'd like to do is just share a little bit of the experience of the last 6 weeks as someone who's deeply committed, as many of you are, to our faith, and also someone as sitting in the seat I sat in watching what was happening and feeling so many different things through the process of this experience. And I want to begin with this question of the hire that happened, not in my department, in another department, but as part of the leadership of the UUA. I was one of the people who saw the decision, learned about the decision, and had no reflection on why it was a problematic decision for us. What happened was that the person who was hired became the fifth on a team of 5 people who lead our whole country, our congregational life staff around the country. And with this hire, which was the second hire we've done in 2 years in that 5-person team, the team remained all white. And none of us in the leadership said, stop. But as you know, others did. Others saw what happened, saw what very sadly we didn't see, and said, stop. And I have to say that while I feel embarrassed and sad that I wasn't someone who saw right away what should have been seen, I also feel deeply grateful that there were people who were willing to speak up, hold up this mirror, and tell us to stop. So that really kind of captures what I feel has happened in our movement right now. That was my personal experience, but I believe it really is the experience we are having as a UUA right now, is that many of us, and I want to say, on the Leadership Council, we've been working very hard, having conversations, and then more conversations about questions of hiring and inclusion. But that did, and we have processes and procedures in place in an effort to be inclusive in our hiring and make sure that our hiring reflects our values. But that wasn't nearly enough. And this stop, this invitation to stop, this demand to stop, I believe was a gift, for one thing. I also believe that in the system we live in the water we swim in, that nothing short of this could have caught us and forced us to really stop and look. So feeling stopped and called to a new understanding, I want to share some of the other things that I'm feeling and that perhaps some of you are feeling too. I'm feeling deep grief for the loss that we feel at the UUA of these 3 senior staff people who sincerely love our faith and committed so much of themselves to the work that they felt called to do. I feel grief, and again, I feel gratitude, because in all 3 cases, none of these men were asked to resign. In every case, they felt that their stepping aside would make this moment of stop more of an opportunity. I think that they really felt like their moving aside would create the space so that we could seize this moment for the important moment it is in the history of our faith and move forward in faith and not in fear, as some are saying. I also find this time as a case, a kind of story part of our larger story that really brings home a point about who we are that I feel is critically important for us to remember who we are. What is the UUA? And I think many of us are getting clearer and clearer about what the UUA is. Clear that Peter is not the UUA, that Boston, somewhere in Boston, moving around, but somewhere in Boston is not the UUA, and that any one congregation is not the UUA, but instead that the energy that arises from our highest aspirations of what Unitarian Universalism might call us to be in the world and create in the world, that aspiration and the energy that arises when we gather together in religious exploration, places in worship, between congregations particularly, and in constituent groups like Black Lives of Unitarian Universalism, that gather together to call us to those highest aspirations and remind us of who we are, that is who we are. And that is the piece in the midst of all of the pain and the grief. That's the piece that gives me the most hope. And the one last thing about hope that I want to share is that the grief that I've felt, I've described so far, is related to my relationships with the people involved and my own failure. But there's another tremendously important piece of that grief, and that is around the way I am now hearing more deeply and truly than I have ever heard the stories from my colleagues and fellow UUs of color. Again, I feel a great deal of sadness that my heart had not been broken open in that way before. But the courage and the faithfulness of Unitarian Universalists of color who are standing up and asking us to be more, who are standing up and asking us to hear and see them, truly see them, is so inspiring. And the heartbreaking part is that we're not doing it to the extent that we need to be yet. And the hopeful part is that I believe this moment of stop is our door into that kinship and that work of justice and that connection that I believe is more possible now than ever. I'm feeling all of those things at once, and I'm guessing many Unitarian Universalists also are feeling all that mix of things. And now I am truly hopeful that we will find each other more truly than we ever have before, and that the future for our faith is more than I dreamed it might be before this all happened for us. So I hope that you are also finding for yourself those seeds of hope and those places where you will be making your own commitments to our faith.
So I've got 4 questions, and then we'll open it up to the floor. Hopefully these questions will engage many of us here. So first, given that the problems in hiring and diversity are long-term problems for Unitarian Universalism, what expectations ought we to have that the association is going to, and the congregations actually, not just the UUA, are going to make progress in confronting these now when it has been so persistently, it's been so difficult to make progress to this point? Either of you.
Well, that is the question, isn't it? And the answer that I can offer is that the Board of Trustees has been quite clear that what we need is the broadest kind of conversation in Unitarian Universalism, in our congregations, in our affiliated organizations, about what kind of leadership we need to model for us to answer the opportunity that's a part of this time. And I want to take one step back and say that that broad conversation will be engaged by what the Board of Trustees called a commission. And that commission is being organized by one of the other co-presidents, Sophia Betancourt. And that will be, and her charge is to lay the foundation upon which that commission can do its work. That commission will be concerned not just with hiring practices at the UUA, but will be looking at the needs we have for truth-telling about who we are now, what our practices are at the UUA and in the congregations that make up the association, what kind of reconciliation we need to move toward, and what kind of policies we need to put in place broadly. Those policies at the UUA level are actually the simplest part of the problem. And I have some particular responsibility for imagining us into a different set of policies for hiring. And I want to be clear that the incident that triggered this was not an incident where someone on the UUA staff did not follow good and serious policies already in place. But those policies followed the model of opportunity and affirmative action rather than outcome. And so the policies were designed to make sure that no one was excluded from the process, and that was done. The policies were designed to recruit persons of color and that was done. What the policies were not designed to do was to inspect the outcome. And we need to move into a period where we are looking at outcome, to say that it is time for us to center the experience and the presence of persons of color in Unitarian Universalism, to center the voices of persons of color in our faith, so that we begin modeling the beloved community toward which we want to move. It's a radical shift, and actually will take us considerable distance if we are able to do it. What will make sure that we're going to get there? There are no guarantees in this life. We will only get there, only make the next step if we do it together. And so this is a real challenge for us as a community.
Second question, what changes are being planned for this coming June's General Assembly in New Orleans as a result of the events and what's been going on?
Sorry, we're figuring this out as we go along. Well, there are a number of things that will be different. First, rather than there being a singular president who will be passing the baton to his successor, there will be a three African-American person team of presidents who will be standing up before the General Assembly and reflecting on the meaning of these times for us as a faith community. Exactly what that will look like? Well, I've been interim co-president now for almost 2 weeks, and I do not have it yet all figured out. But I do know that there will need to be an opportunity for us to invite reflection of that gathered group of UU leaders into the challenges and the opportunity of this time. We're going to need to recognize the grief that many are feeling, and the pain, and the shock that this could even be a conversation we're having. We're going to need to do all of that, and that was not part of the original General Assembly program, I should tell you. So some changes will need to be made, and they will be, I trust.
And the thing that I wanted to add, because I know many of you are watching the unveiling of our Legacy Challenge campaign as part of the Wake Now Our Vision project, the collaborative campaign, which Shelter Rock has been so generous to fund. we will be actually slowing down a little bit because we don't want to announce, the real kickoff of that. It's already going. There's already a lot happening. Lee Barker and I reported to the board a couple of weeks ago, so the board is aware of the steps we're taking and the progress we're making. We're getting gifts in. It's going very well. But we don't want to put a big, splashy, real kickoff event in the midst of a General Assembly where people's attention is really focused somewhere else. And so we're going to slow down that process just a little bit, even as we continue to talk to congregations and individual UUs about participating in the campaign. So there will be a larger splash after the new president is in place at the UUA and probably in the fall, winter of next year. So I just wanted to let you know that was a little bit of a shift in our plans, and primarily to make the space so that our big announcement and the big kickoff gets the attention that it deserves.
For those of you who may not know exactly what the Legacy Campaign, our congregation made a $5 million gift to a consortium of 6 organizations, Unitarian Universalist organizations, to do matching grants to the organizations when people in the congregations make gifts either to the congregation or to one of these organizations. And that's going to be rolled out over the next 5 or 6 years. And that's the program to which Mary Catherine is making reference. How many of you are planning to go to General Assembly this year? So there's a goodly number of people here in the room who will be witnessing what happens there. My third question is, how do you anticipate that the new UUA president elected in June will incorporate the work of this interim team in her leadership at the UUA?
It is a fascinating question, and I'll offer a couple of comments, and then I'm going to invite Mary Catherine to speculate as well. The first thing to say is that I'm trying to wrap my head around this image. 3 African-American co-presidents passing the baton to a single white woman president. And I'm just not sure. What I do know is that the 3 persons who have very wonderfully put themselves forward for this level of leadership are in the process of discerning what this time means for them. In some significant sense, the job that they are auditioning for, the ministry that they are applying for, has shifted in the last 2 months. But each of the 3 is a very committed and very talented leader among us, and they will come forward with their imagination for what needs to shift for them should they be elected. I should tell you that the 3 co-presidents have already begun meeting with the 3 candidates. We had an in-person meeting last week. We'll be meeting by Zoom again this coming week so that all 3 of the candidates know the actions that the co-presidents are taking in this interim period so that they will not be surprised. And one of the things that we're being very clear about with them is that the process of change and policy shift at the association and the work of the commission needs to be ongoing work that they need to embrace. That's one of the changes that these times have called out.
Thanks, Bill. What I would say is that I've heard the candidates speak together in forums, both before Peter's resignation and after. And what I see is really a digging in, a deepening of their thinking, their reflections on the question of racial inclusion and Black lives of Unitarian Universalism within our faith. But it's not that they didn't have that as part of their vision before this happened. So I'm certain that practically speaking, there are many changes. What I would say about all 3 of them myself is that they bring courage and a deep commitment to listening. And I think those are the 2 most important characteristics for the person who will be taking on the mantle of president.
Thank you. My final question here. What impact do you think that the recent conflict and staff changes of the UUA are likely to have on the growth of Unitarian Universalism?
So I want to share just a little story from my family. I was feeling a little overwhelmed at work 4 weeks ago and didn't actually have time to call my son, who's in college, and I got an email from him. He's on Facebook. He's friends with some of my friends. He's not involved in Unitarian Universalism, but I was amazed to see how closely he was watching what was happening. And since that time, I've been hearing from him periodically his own assessment and concerns and questions, all of which reflect for me a generational shift that is a part of this that we haven't touched on really, but that our younger people are watching and kind of saying, all right, finally, I'm so glad you stopped and paid attention. And that's essentially what my son said to me. And I really feel like if my son does, and I pray he does, find his way back into Unitarian Universalism as a member of a congregation, it will be because we are answering this call. And so what I'd say about growth is that an institution that is vibrant and bold and really facing what its values are calling it to be in the world is going to be a dynamic institution. There will be people going and there will be people coming, and if that vision is bold and if the invitation to be part of important, meaningful work is present, that we will be a growing movement again. We live in a time when the religious landscape is changing rapidly, so that is also true, that people are affiliating in different ways. But I am not saying this because it sounds like the right thing. I sincerely believe that I sincerely feel more hopeful now than I have in a long time about our potential to grow as a movement.
What a lovely answer. I would be the last one to present a Pollyanna picture. I believe that Unitarian Universalism is being significantly tested in these days. And I want you all to be clear about that. If you're looking for a period of comfort and ease in Unitarian Universalism, my prediction is that you will be sorely disappointed. But having said that, if we in fact are modeling an authentic engagement with the issues before us, if we are truly trying to imagine our way and live our way into that next step, then I believe people will want to join with us, because we are not the only folks who yearn for something more, something deeper, something richer, something more meaningful in our lives. I think back to that first Sunday after November 8th. I don't know what it was like around here. Where I minister in Portland, Oregon, we were standing room only, and we continued standing room only for weeks as people who yearned for religious community based on values that they could affirm said, I need to be in church. And so there just is, for me, no doubt that there are thousands and millions of people out there yearning for what we have, what we find here, if we are willing to engage authentically with our issues and to be authentically welcoming to them as they come in the doors. I think the future can be bright.
And I'd like to share, I mentioned a couple of times a newish group that some of you may not be aware of, Black Lives of Unitarian Universalism. A number of people are nodding. This is a group that emerged out of the Black Lives Matter movement, and within our congregations, one of the first times they gathered was at an organizing meeting for Black Lives Matter activists. The Unitarian Universalists in the house found each other and sat together and shared their experiences of what it is like for them to be to be Black identified Unitarian Universalists in our congregations, and actually some of them not in our congregations, no longer in our congregations. Blue, the group of 7 organized themselves and developed remarkable programming for our General Assembly last year. They came to our board in October and said, we're really serious about this. We want to provide a ministry to Black identified Unitarian Universalists, and we need your help. And the board made a financial commitment to that. And in March, they had a convening, about 120 people gathered in New Orleans for the Black Lives of Unitarian Universalism convening. And Lena K. Gardner, who is now their executive director and was one of the first organizers, sat at the board table with a colleague of hers and gave a little bit of a report, just sharing what the experience was like at the convening. Just to share a few things with you, one of the things they did was they organized interest areas for people to choose: advocacy, pastoral care, ministry, worship, various different things. And what they discovered was, I think it was 80% of the people present chose the group that was on pastoral care and spiritual needs. And so the organizing group for the meeting got back together and said, okay, hold on. We need to reorder what we were doing. We knew that many Black identified UUs were feeling not ministered to and feeling in grave need of pastoral care and connection. We didn't have any idea the response would be like that. And so this wonderful group of leaders, Black identified UUs, are creating something new. It's still forming, and it's not at all clear kind of what all the paths it will take, but their deep commitment is to ministering and pastoral care among Black UUs, also finding ways to create ministries in that community of Unitarian Universalists, and in large part out of a deep hope that we can stay together as Unitarian Universalists, because the stories that they were hearing again and again were from folks who felt not fully welcomed, not fully belonging, feeling like people would look at them and not see them as Unitarian Universalists fully. And so you might have some other things to add about this, but I just wanted to share this important ministry that's going on that is vibrant and very promising, I think, for our faith in many ways.
I'll add 2 quick things. One is that the 3rd co-president is Dr. Leon Spencer, whom some of you may know. He has been doing anti-racism work and other work, Journey Toward Wholeness work in our faith for decades. And his portfolio is outreach and connection with groups like Blue, other person of color groups like Drum, professional organizations like Loretta, the Ministers Association. So he's doing networking is what he's doing, and making sure that as the co-presidents lay the groundwork for this long commission process, that we are in sufficient conversation, we're hearing from enough people so that we do that work well. And I'll save my other.
So this is the time I encourage those of you who have questions to take advantage of the microphones that are here, and if you kind of queue up, you could sit down in the front pews here, so that you don't always have to stand in a queue. But that should be live. Richard?
It should be. Thank you. My question to you is, I heard a moment ago your expression about the folks who come through the door. And one of the things that concerns me, because right here at Shelter Rock, one of the hats I wear is our publicity and promotion activity. And we are constantly trying to reach out locally to what some people describe as the nuns, the people who do not feel comfortable coming through the door, but we know they're out there. We know they have Unitarian Universalism at heart, and I am just asking if there is any focus at all from the three co-presidents or the future of attracting people who want worship in a different way. The success of our Soulful Sundown program here is an excellent model of the people who may not want to come on Sunday, but it's something that I think we as Unitarian Universalists need to address, and I hope that you have some words.
Yes. Meaning that there's a need for us to be in experimental mode, I think, for some considerable period of time. Experimental mode, like some of the experimentation that you've been doing here with Soulful Sundown. I did not know that you had been doing that, but that's great. Experimentation, though, that goes more broadly, so that the conversation that people hear when they enter resonates with them. And so I'm going to go back to the sermon of this morning for a moment. The language of white supremacy is very challenging language for many white Unitarian Universalists. But you need to know that, though it's not true for every African American or person of color, there's a huge range in that community as well, but for most African American and person of color identified folks, the language of white supremacy is actually language that we understand. It makes perfect sense to us. We understand that it's about a system, not about individual attitudes. And so some of the languaging that we do can actually be inviting to broader communities when they hear us engaging with it in an authentic way. And so that's a conversation that I know will be engaged, I think, is already being engaged starting this morning, and you will engage with it again next week, Ned. But that's an important thing for you to know. Some of the sensitivities to language and conversation that are built into the DNA of Unitarian Universalism are not sensitivities for many of the people who come in through the door. They actually want us to be talking about those things.
I don't think we need to ask why the UUA got stuck off center. In leadership positions, clergy prefer clergy over laity, men prefer men over women, and whites prefer whites over people of color. The question is, where are the checks and balances? The UUA obviously cannot police itself, and I don't know what direction General Assemblies provide either. And I feel this congregation is complicit in what happened because we contribute to the UUA. And I don't think the UUA has either met its fiduciary responsibility or its moral responsibility. So the question is, how can the UUA be held accountable and forced to live up to its own principles?
So I want to acknowledge that that's a pretty challenging statement. What I can tell you is the approach that I am trying to take in this current very short interim period. And let me go back to something that I said earlier, that the hiring process which prompted these most recent events was a process that complied with the UUA's best policies to date. It simply did not have an outcome with which we can live. And so we need an outcome-oriented policy in terms of our hiring. And that is what I am in the process of developing. It's only 2 weeks old, and so it's not nearly complete. But it takes a model that was actually developed by the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee, which says that sets a numerical benchmark for the number of persons of color on the UUA staff. Call it 30% overall. We'll set a higher standard for the upper levels of management. And the way that it insists on accountability is to say that if a hire is to be made when the institution has fallen below those numerical targets, it can only be a hire of a person of color. And if a person of color is not found, then that hire does not take place. And a wider net needs to be cast to recruit candidates. It's an approach that has proven to work within our movement at the UUSC. A similar approach was used actually at Beacon Press, although not quite articulated that way. So I'm one who believes that with appropriate reflection, the institution of the UUA can actually address that specific problem. That will not, however, address the problem as it lives in the congregations that make up the association, or in the professional organizations, or the affiliate groups. That's why we need to have an embracing conversation about what standards we are willing to embrace in order to move into a hopeful future. The language of accountability is language that I am positively inclined toward. That's why in this interim period, I'm out talking with congregations like yours, talking with as many people as I can about the approach that we will take, because accountability to me means the people that you need to talk to as you're moving through difficult times. That's why I'm here. And that's why I think we need to do this together. You may want to offer a commentary.
You've partly answered the...
This is my wife, Maria, who often tells me what to do, and I try very hard to listen. I'm not sure what you're asking me to deliver. Oh. All right, so the UUSC developed this policy under the leadership of Bill Schultz, whom many of you know. I know that Bill has visited Shelter Rock many times. He actually developed this policy when he was serving as the executive director of Amnesty International, when he felt, and Amnesty, as you know, works primarily internationally. And what Bill decided was that he simply could not have a staff of white people telling communities of color around the world what to do. He simply was not willing to do that. And so he developed this policy, and I'm borrowing it from him.
You've partially answered my question here, but I have a general introduction to the question, and that is that I think that finding people who are willing to listen is good, but not adequate. That I don't think we're facing up to that. When the decision was made in this community to locate here, with all the wonderful principles that we had about inclusivity, it was good, but not adequate. We are in a position where the lower rungs of financial community cannot get here easily. And if they had been represented when the decision was made, people would have been very disappointed. We would not have this wonderful campus. But we excluded without intending to exclude. And I fear that the same thing may be happening here. That I found in working as a consultant in New York City, there was a world of difference between sitting in an office with well-meaning white men sitting around a table and who really cared about people. That was good, but it wasn't adequate. It was entirely different when you had people who truly represented the people in the community. And they not only were being consulted, they were part of the decision-making process from the very beginning.
Amen. So part of the opportunity in these times is actually to make sure that we bring a different set of voices into the conversation and into the decision-making conversation. And to ask the questions that, actually that Jennifer posed this morning, not only to ask who's here, but who's not here. And to be intentional about extending invitation to those who are not here. And that invitation process, I mean, you will learn things. So I serve the First Unitarian Church of Portland, Oregon. They made the decision to stay downtown. We have a full city block. It's actually quite a remarkable campus in downtown Portland, right in the midst of the homelessness and the gentrification, all of it. But you start asking who's not there, and you say, well, you know, there are not many people who have physical disabilities who are present. And then you look at the campus, and you realize that the campus is a nightmare for someone with physical challenges. I'm beginning to get a little taste of it now that I use a cane. And so you begin to say, well, maybe we should pay attention to. So you begin learning things as you ask the question of who is not here and why. I want to affirm every word you said.
Speaking of a period of dis-ease, in the initial Sturm und Drang with the resignations, there was a lot flying around Facebook and et cetera. And there was a particular chain that I wanted to check out with you folks about people of color being afraid to attend General Assembly this year for fear of violence. I couldn't quite believe it. It was very upsetting to me, and I just wanted to check it out with you folks.
Yes, that chain did exist. And we will be trying to pay attention to that, but primarily in a religious and faithful sense. So a dramatically increased number of chaplains are being recruited, including in the community of color by the Blue Organization and by Drum, so that we have supports for people. The experience, I am not active on social media, but I have read enough of those threads, the many threads, to believe that they pose a significant danger for us. They encourage us to bring our worst selves to the table rather than our best selves. And we need to be in a position where we can be our best selves in community. And that's what I am going to be striving to help facilitate at the General Assembly. We will not be having armed guards at the General Assembly. It just seems inappropriate for a religious community. But we are all called, all of those who will be there, to be mindful of the experience of danger, be mindful of the they're called microaggressions. Many of you have been in enough training so you know this language. to be mindful of the microaggressions which are the experience of persons of color almost always in Unitarian Universalist settings, and to be supportive and to be allies as we move through this time together. There's more to be said, but that's a partial answer, Nancy.
Hi, thanks. You actually answered half of my question here. My big question was, what would you do as UUA, as our congregation here, about the backlash? You know what I'm saying? When difficult things are broached, Mary Catherine, I really appreciate how you talked about the stop mirror moment. This is not to put a blame, like why did it take you so long or anything like that, because everyone has a different place where it comes to. But let's say with Ferguson, the Justice Department released that amazing report that was a revelation to many people, and there was backlash. No, it didn't happen. It didn't happen. I don't want to believe it happened. I will tell you that a lot of the same things are the undercurrents happening in this congregation here. There's a couple of events that really kind of crystallize, maybe to my shame, it ticked me off intensely when it happened. It got me very upset, but I kept quiet because I just, I didn't want the backlash. I didn't want it. A few years ago, we had an interim, somebody who's not going to mention their name, who came down so hard on a couple of kids of color that they left. And that's why they're not here, because they were treated like criminals for things that other kids have done. When the second thing was when our last minister was called, it was a conversation. I don't think definitely wasn't coming from the officials' channels, but are you going to be comfortable with somebody of color being, in a position of authority? And that is the undercurrent that does exist. It exists. We know it exists. It's very uncomfortable to look at. It's very difficult for a community who wants to think well of itself. It's difficult because, especially those of us who are, people of color coming into a white majority congregation, we're not here to tell you that you're doing things bad. We understand you're trying very hard. This is not, we love you individually. It's not to say, to call names or anything like that, but to understand that the backlash and the potential for it really, really, truly does exist. There's discomfort with the idea of all this stuff happening. And there will be a backlash. I'm just going to ask you about that.
I talked about discomfort, and you have named one of the primary discomforts that is actually and it breaks the heart of most people who are aware. So I'm going to do just a personal riff here for a minute, Ned, if I may. Being the only or one of the few persons of color in a Unitarian Universalist congregation is do you know how strong the need has to be for a person of color to come into a congregation which is overwhelmingly white, especially if you don't know anyone else in the congregation? It takes enormous courage to walk through those doors into this sanctuary. And for those persons who find a home here, persons of color who find a home based on our theology of love and embrace of difference for persons then to be challenged and to find that their home is not a safe space is so painful. It is so painful. And I speak for myself, for no one else, but I speak for myself. And so what do we want? What do the persons of color who are a part of this congregation, a part of other Unitarian Universalist congregations, want from the white members of the congregations? We want to be seen. We want our experience to be valued. We want our voice to be heard. We want to be able to narrate our story, just like you do. Just like you do. And we do not want to be silenced when our voices sound a slightly different place. We want that to be seen as an enrichment of the life of this community. It's the same thing. We all want the same thing, actually. This is work that we can do. That's why I come back time and time again. This is not an impossible dream for us to achieve.
Yeah, microphone here, and then come back over here.
Latifah Woodhouse, I welcome you all. Bill, Mary Catherine, and Maria, welcome to our congregation. Bill, you were the president of the UUA, and during your time, you had done wonderful work on racial justice. I was part of that. I appreciate that. The fact of the matter is, it does hurt, and I've experienced it myself in my own congregation. I never thought I was different, but I have been treated differently many occasions. And the question is, what is the UUA, our denomination, when we believe in the inherent worth and dignity of every human? What have we done? What kind of plans do we have? What are the plans of you as an interim president and our leaders in election, is going to be coming for the future of the UUA?
So it is the 64. Shouldn't probably use monetary terms at this congregation. That is the question. That is the question. What plans will we put in place? And I know that I have laid a great deal of hope on this commission that is being created, because I think we have some. If we knew exactly what to do, we'd be doing it already. And so we have some real honest reflection to do and some new understandings to gain about how we need to address the issues of race and ethnicity and class and difference. Far too often, I'm going to be blunt. Far too often, Unitarian Universalist congregations have viewed diversity as a challenge to get a few more darker faces so that the white folks in the field are. That is not an approach which works. We know that does not work. So what is the grounding that we must find to authentically move forward? How can we create communities where the various stories of human living are all welcomed as one rich tapestry? We use the language of tapestry a lot. How can we create congregations which do not essentialize race without understanding that our identities are complex? Goodness gracious. We're not just racial beings, we have ethnic identities and sexual orientation and gender identity and ability and all of the intersectionality of these oppressions need to be understood in a deeper way. And so we need to find some ground on which we can actually step. I shouldn't be using the word step because that's an ableist metaphor. I'm being taken to task for this by my co-president, Sophia Betancourt, where we can go deeper and understand more profoundly our theology that we are all, each and every one of us, children of God. I use God language. That we are all, each and every one of us, already loved that we are all, each and every one of us, filled with potential, that the spirit of life moves within us and among us, we need to go deeper than we have gone before.
I think we'll have time for these three people are here. Yes, good. We'll do it, and then we'll conclude at that point. Good.
I was wondering about what the leadership was doing to address the edited truths of the civil rights movement within the UUA, and I was also wondering if we were addressing the serious divide of class and academic prestige within our communities. The edited truths that the UUA have put forward about edited truths that the UUA has put forward about the civil rights movement.
By the edited truths, I'm going to make some, let me just test this with you and make sure that I'm understanding what you're saying. The edited truths that we were on the forefront, that we went to Selma, and that we've somehow got it fixed?
No, more of the aftermath. So when I learned in a youth leadership program was pre this conversation, a person who had anger about this pre this conversation, is that after the civil rights movement, when there was a short period of time of influx of people of color into our congregation, not being openly accepted, not experiencing the same things as Latifah Woodhouse was expressing, and that was just not included in the history that we tell in religious education, that we tell our congregation, that we always tell them that we were at the forefront of being protesters, but that we were not accepting as a community.
We love to tell the stories of our triumph. We absolutely love to tell the stories of our triumph. We were, answered Dr. King's call. Every Unitarian Universalist minister that I know who was then serving when Dr. King invited ministers to come, claims to have been there. Every one. There would have been hundreds of UU. Now, many were there, but it's an example of our wish to present ourselves as actually kind of innocent and righteous. And part of what I bring in my own personal story is the knowledge that that is so far from true, because I had to leave Unitarian Universalism in that period, feeling so betrayed by our faith. And it was not until a dozen years later that I was able to cross the threshold of another Unitarian Universalist church. So I will not tolerate that kind of triumphal telling of our story.
I want to make sure you all know about Bill's sermon from General Assembly this past year. Please look it up on the UUA website. It's one of the most powerful sermons I've ever heard, and we all need to hear it. So go on UUA.org and look at GA and find Bill's sermon.
Now, here's the complexity. We both need to honestly tell the story of this faith, both the high points and the places where we have failed. But we cannot let those failures determine what we do from here. That's the spiritual challenge.
Hi, I'm Monica Schlichting. This spring, I was at the UUNO Spring Seminar, and we had a workshop for racial justice. And one of the things that was discussed was about an eighth principle. And I don't know if you talked about this. I was a few minutes late. Do you know about that eighth principle that's being brought forward from Black Lives UU?
Thank you. So it's Monica? Thank you, Monica. I'm glad that came up at the UNO conference. So the Black Lives of UU group is advocating for an adoption, a bylaw change. So that's in our processes, that's a complicated and long process that happens, but it will be proposed at this year's General Assembly. I believe that's right. And that is to affirm, I actually don't know the language, affirm inclusion of people. Oh, I'd love it. Yeah, that'd be very helpful. Thanks, Monica.
Member congregation of the Unitarian Universalist Association, covenant to affirm and promote journeying towards spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and our institutions.
So a really strong call for facing racial injustice and addressing the issues that are in front of us. And many are saying, wait a minute, isn't that what our first principle means? And I was privileged to be present when the board was having a little bit of the UUA board was having a little bit of a conversation about this. And it was very moving to hear folks on the board reflect, and some of the observers as well, many of whom reflected their own experience that, yes, they can see those words, but their lived experience in our faith is that that is not something we have yet affirmed. And that by taking this step, it would go a long way for them, that's what I was hearing, in their own sense of inclusion and commitment of our larger faith for us to include this. There was also the story from a young woman of color on the board who said, that's absolutely what I learned in growing up in religious exploration. I knew exactly what it meant, and that's what it meant in my church. So our experiences are different, but this question of hearing, listening, really being present, centering the experiences of people of color, I think for me, that's the piece, that's the opportunity that is before us right now. And the eighth principle, it doesn't fit in some ways. It's different in some ways. I think many of us could make process arguments against it. There are lots of ways to come at it, but for me right now, what I'm feeling is the need to deeply listen to people who are asking us to make this affirmation toward our wholeness.
And Jean will give you the last question, and then we will give opportunity for our guests to say a final word, and we'll be on our way.
All right. About 20 years ago, Boston UUA encouraged to have all the churches, the congregations across the entire United States to embark upon getting together with the other communities of black color in their communities, and to kind of work together, get to know each other together, and participate, okay? We entered that, and for 2 years, we embarked on that. We really had a very successful getting together, getting to know each other. At the end of the 2 years, I wrote to Boston, because I didn't hear anything later. I wrote to Boston and said, you know, I like successful stories. It would be nice to have some kind of a showing of what all of these congregations had over the last 2 years. The successes, the failures, how they did it, and all of that. My response from Boston was this: I like success stories. I cannot believe that across our country there aren't some congregations that have done exactly what we are talking about now. Are we listening to them? Are we inviting them to say, hey, how did you do this? How did you do that? Oh, that didn't work. I understand what you're saying. I can't believe that there aren't congregations we can learn from to help be more successful this time.
Thank you, Gene.
Thank you very much. And the answer that I would offer is that, yes, of course there are some congregations that we can learn very particular things from. How we do that is one of the questions that I think this General Assembly needs to reflect on. So we have wonderful congregations that have actually been living in multiculturalism for some time. I think of All Souls Church in Washington, D.C., or All Souls Church in Tulsa, Oklahoma, or Community Church in New York City, right? But I think it is also true, that those congregations have not felt that their stories were very welcome or interesting to most Unitarian Universalist congregations. That most Unitarian Universalist congregations did not think they had the location or the history or the leadership that could actually follow the lead of those congregations. And so maybe now we can have a somewhat different conversation about finding the leadership, the location, the history that might allow more of us to take advantage of their wisdom. It's a great question.
Are there parting words that Mary Catherine, you and Bill would like to offer? And
my parting words would be where I started with gratitude for this congregation. You have consistently stayed the course in your support for the larger family of faith. I hope you will continue to do so. But you have my and our unending gratitude for the support that you've already given.
And I want to add my thanks. I've served in parishes and congregations for 27 years before I came to the UUA, and I had awareness of your story as a congregation and the difference you've made in our faith. Sometimes when I first started coming, I felt like I knew more about the difference you make than you all did. And I always want to try to remind you and lift up of the importance of your leadership and the difference it's made. And I just want to take a little privilege and use Howard Thurman to close just a very brief reading after sharing gratitude. In the quietness of this place, surrounded by the all-pervading presence of God, of love, my heart whispers, keep fresh before me moments of my high resolve, that in fair weather or foul, in good times or in tempests, in the days when the darkness and the foe are nameless or familiar, I may not forget that to which my life is committed. Keep fresh before me moments of my high resolve. Amen.
Amen. Let's thank our visitors for their time and service and energy. And thanks to all of you for your gift of time for us today. And we aspire to be in continuing relationship with the UUA and with the leadership of the UUA. So we encourage you all to continue to support one another and this congregation so that we can continue to do that. Many blessings on your way today. I think there's a meeting of the GA.
There will be a very truncated GA orientation meeting downstairs office conference room starting as soon as you can get there.